as we look forward, there's a lot of things going on and a lot of people saying what Alabama needs to do. I'm going to save this, but no one's talking about what Clemson needs to do to beat Alabama. Have you noticed that? That's an interesting narrative. No one is even – it's like Alabama is a defeated team unless they get lucky. I don't believe that. I think that Clemson has to do some things to win as well. And this first key to victory is for either coach, either team. Whichever one does this better will win the game, will take a huge step toward winning the game, James. One of the things that when you look at bowl games, you have a long time. It's almost – it is not almost – it is the equivalent of spring practice. It may actually give you more practices or the same number of practices if you get into the championship game. It gives you even more practices. I mean, think about that. You get a spring practice. And what do you do during the spring most of the time? You put in new stuff, right? But most of the time in the bowl games, you don't. Like, if you had 15 days of spring, that's when you make your changes, right? That's when you – but what did Wimp say yesterday? Wimp said this yesterday on Inside the Locker Room. He said, I know a lot of people say this, but I don't agree with it. He said, people always say, dance with the one that brung you. Go with your strengths. Don't change anything. And Wimp said, I'd be the exact opposite. Well, the first key to victory that I want to share with you is this. Whoever handles the tendencies correctly. Now, that doesn't mean that you don't go with some of your tendencies. You just have to manage it, or you have to know how to manage the other guy. Let me give you an example. The better a coach is, the more vulnerable he is to this, James. So what's happening right now? Let's fly up to Clemson. Their coaches are sitting around and looking at Alabama's formations and saying what? Oh, every time they come out in two tight ends with one split and one back and Jalen is in the pistol, this is what they run. If Alabama comes out and does that, they just played into whose hands? They just played into Clemson's hands because they stuck with their tendencies. And that's what Wimp's talking about. If you do what you've always done and you got 12 to 13 games of film, that other coach now has a chance to take advantage of that. So if you come in and you do exactly what you've always done, and that's it, ironically, we were so predictable in the bowl game. Think about this. Our tendencies were so bad by the second quarter, Boulware knew what we were going to be doing on offense, and we had a brand new coach. That's how predictable we became in that game. That they were calling our plays without even having film on that offensive coordinator. Or did they? Actually, they didn't have any film of him calling plays at Alabama, James, but they had film of him calling plays from where? Southern Cal and Washington. And what he did was it looked like it was going to be a new offense, but he did exactly what he had always done everywhere else he had already been.
You sure Mike Shula circa 2006 wasn't calling plays in that Clemson game by that description?
Well, I don't know if he was or not, but I know that but think about it, James. Here's a brand new coordinator that you supposedly have no film on, right? At Alabama. But we are creatures of habit. So the better a coach is, this is what I always tell people. Like I can remember when I was coaching little kids, okay? I was coaching youth football, youth basketball, and I would put stuff in based on how they're supposed to play. Okay? Like you call a certain play in basketball, and they're supposed to switch, or they're supposed to go over the top or underneath. But if the coach on the other side doesn't know the coach and teach his kids that, It doesn't work. If you're playing football and the guy is supposed to, he's the outside contain guy, and he's supposed to go outside and contain, and you do something to influence that motion, but he's not coached to play it correctly, it hurts you. Okay? So the better a coach is, the easier it is to take advantage of his tendencies, because he's going to coach his players to do it the same way each time, every time. And you can take full advantage of it. So will Alabama or Clemson, which team's going to come out and line up and take advantage of the other team's tendencies? In other words, not take advantage of the other team tendencies, but take advantage, James, of the fact that team right now. Let me give you an example. If we put Josh Jacobs in at running back and it's third down, and our tendency, James, is that we run a swing pass with him, or we run the off tackle play. If that's what we've done every time, Clemson knows that. So how do you take advantage of the fact that they're good coaches at Clemson and that Venable has spent his time in the film room? You come out in that exact same look, you make the exact same motion, and you run a screen. You run the exact same motion, and you send him on a fly pattern, a streak right down the middle of the field. You do something that breaks your tendency. And the best example I can give you of a coach figuring out tendencies and the other team not realizing they had that tendency, James, is the onside kick. Nick Saban, we had that onside kick how often in that game, James? Every time we scored, we could have kicked that onside kick. But we didn't need it. But when we needed it, they were just as predictable at that moment as they had been all season. Now, what if they had set up something to make it look like they were anticipating something and changed it? And so if Alabama is going to have success, I think one of the things they're going to have to do, James, is break some of the tendencies. The last 3 or 4 games that we've struggled, what have we done? We've been behind the chains on first down and second down. And if we're going to be better and we're going to have better third down, which is going to be one of my keys to victory, we're going to have to do better on first down. We're going to have to break some tendencies. We're going to have to line up and run something that we hadn't ran. We're going to have to show formations that we have been that we've ran a lot. I know that in Mississippi State and a couple other games, when we lined Josh Jacobs up at slot, we've either ran him across the middle, James, for the quick pass, we ran him on the reverse, or we've faked it and given it to Damian. We better have something else off of that because they'll be prepared for all 3 of those plays. And if we don't break that tendency, it's going to make it difficult for the Tide, especially if that D-line of Clemson can line up and tee off. So the first key to victory for Alabama against Clemson is to break some tendencies, James. Do something you hadn't done. Hey, how many of you out there would like to see a screen pass? I'm raising my hand. I would love to see a screen pass. Teams have learned, James, that we don't do anything to slow down the blitz. They've learned that. We don't do anything to slow down the rush. So what they're doing now is they're playing the run on the way to the quarterback. So they're not concerned with a screen. They're not concerned with draws. They're picking their landing point because the quarterback goes to the same spot on all of his drops, and you can force him. I know everybody says Jalen goes to the right, and he does. Well, that's a tendency. So what do? How do you do your pass rush, James? Go back and look at that Auburn game. Auburn rushed hard from the right side, their right side, and then the guy on the left, Holland, just mirrored Jalen. They didn't come hard up the field and try to get to Jalen. And when they did, they forced him to the left, and he got good yardage. But when he goes to the right, he's not as effective. They knew that. They played that, and that's what I'm talking about. Break tendency. Roll him out to the left on purpose.
Another great way to break a tendency, one of these traditional tendencies of Alabama football, at least over my lifetime, not throwing to the tight end.
Oh, you
go.
You mean use the middle of the field?
Exactly. Use the tight end against the linebackers.
Oh, that would be like novel. That would be like a novel tendency breaker there. I mean, you don't even have to worry about the middle of the field against us. And I think some of that is play calling, and I think some of that is quarterback play. But either way, and one of the other tendencies, James, that we have to break, and we'll get to break after this, is we have to stop giving Jalen so many options. Last year, Kiffin had him look to the sideline, and then he made the audible. This year, Dable does what? Dable lets him change it. I'm saying we need to intentionally break tendency. We don't need as many read options. And if you run a read option, that's okay if you run it, but go ahead and call give. You know, Gus Malzahn doesn't, even though it looks like the read option every time, I know a couple coaches that says that he will call a read option play, but he tells the quarterback, give it to the running back. Give it to the running back. And that's why sometimes you see Auburn, they'll go 3 or 4 plays, James, and they'll get what? 2 yards, 1 yard, 3 yards. Then all of a sudden, the quarterback who's not near as athletic will pull it and get 18 yards because they have made you honor that inside run. They're breaking a tendency, and then all of a sudden, after the quarterback makes his run, what do you do next? You give it to Kerryon Johnson, and there he goes up the middle. So